Whenever the topic of narrative exposition is brought up, it is usually painted in a negative connotation as an inherent form of amateur writing, and I don't think there's an artistic medium more representative of the stigma than anime. Whether it be budgeting issue or just a necessity to flesh out its promising premise and convoluted world, exposition is now a recurring narrative tool in anime, and often one brimmed with heavy-handed execution. Contextualization usually leads to robotic presentation of plot exposition. Thematic points are often reiterated, although it just comes off as corny most of the time. Magic system are poorly implemented, forcing the viewer to take in an overbearing deposit without giving any reason to care about what's being said, and of course countless other egregious examples of exposition done wrong. On the other hand, good exposition in anime is not necessarily rare to come by, but presumably a technique which is often not brought into discussion due to it being drowned out by poor representation. Needless to say, good execution of exposition plays fair present as well, embracing its strength to reveal detail efficiently while keeping the audience captivated. To say that anime can't do exposition correctly at all is too contentious of a statement to be sound. Series like Evangelion are admired upon for its subtle characterization and its ability to reach the hearts of many. But in the same way, exposition heavy works, including the works of Nichio Ishin and Hunter x Hunter in the same degree, are also beloved and skyrocket up the male ranking. So, the question arises, what is good exposition? The criteria of good exposition generally need two things: its attention to consistency and relevancy from the contextual level. There are of course other factors, but I want to focus on these two essential ideas in this video. What brings an exposition to life is being perfectly aware of the external factors surrounding the scene as it is played out. It needs to have a logical foundation and feel natural in context, as it is reasonable enough for it to occur in real life. That's not to say I'm advocating for total realism, as it is a work of fiction after all. It just needs to be enough for the audience to maintain the suspension of disbelief. This includes careful establishment of the setting, the mood, and even the length of such exposition in a way that represents an accurate depiction of what would occur in a grounded scenario. Characters shouldn't be informing each other of what they already know. Info dumps should not occur in the gist of a climax or a battle to intervene with the dramatic structure. That's enough negativity out of the way. What would be an example of a good scene, you might ask? Well, let's take an example of a leader figure doing a briefing to a group of recruits, in a place where a briefing section usually occur, on top of establishing context only required to comprehend the story, the mission, in this case, then that would be an accurate example of internal consistency. The exposition shouldn't feel like you're learning fact from a textbook coming from a machine complemented with insubstantial visual, but rather a natural part of the character's life that embraces a balance between the expository information and subtextual. It shouldn't just prioritize on filling the holes in the story and the world at large through its dialogue, but also taking advantage of anime as a visual medium to include details outside of its textual element. For instance, the tone it establishes through utilization of directing, or the way the external setting is presented during the exposition reveals something about the world that's not explicitly stated in the dialogue, be it either the consequence of a dystopian universe and its effect on the common people, or a unique frivolous inside look in how a futuristic home works, as seen in Psychopath, for instance. He needs all these things while paying respect to his characters, so he won't project them as devices created by the author for the sole purpose of regurgitating information. And this brings into my next point. Characters need to be consistent as well. If the character is out of expertise of a certain topic, assigning them to be the one to give the exposition would seem out of place, and it's rather hard to take it seriously, or even at all. Similarly, the word choices and the very work of a character should not only be engaging, but should also capture the character's personality in some way if possible. On one hand, you don't want to exaggerate a character into a cute moe girl making new noises, in a rather normal scene leading to tonal whiplashes, but at the same time, reducing your character into a lifeless being won't cut it either, so it needs a perfect balance in the middle. In this case, the voice acting is especially crucial in exemplifying the soul and humanity of the dialogue. And a dry performance can easily transgress the immersion of the show, while an amazing one could have life-changing differences. There are even some series who ridicule the seemingly lack of attention to character consistency. Nakato Yuki from Haruhi Suzumiya, for instance, who info dump in a monotone can be interpreted as a meta-satire on the abundance of robotic exposition in anime. Well, at least it makes sense why she's so knowledgeable about the topic at hand, unlike some other characters, so that's a plus. Either way, it is a trap other series should avoid. The length and content of the exposition itself should be dependent on the amount of context required to progress the story. Some concepts don't need much clarification, or don't even need one at all, and it can get annoying if a series is explaining information that comes off as excessive and don't serve anything meaningful to the narrative. For instance, you might complain about how the ghoul restricted diet of human flesh from Tokyo Ghoul, or the whole mystery surrounding the organ transplant is not expanded upon, especially given the lack of consent from Kaneki, and thus declared it as a plot hole. First off, Tokyo Ghoul in some aspects is a mystery. So if you're reviewing the Doctor's plan from the start and why he turned Kaneki into a ghoul, it would actually take away the entire purpose of Kaneki's journey to discover his own identity. And for something as trivial as ghoul not being able to consume human food, even if it is directly given in a normal natural exposition of a TV announcer about the tongue, if you're asking me, I think that's basically enough information needed to know. Whether or not we were told a full biological reason, for instance, an in-depth look at the anatomy, is in actuality rather redundant and don't improve our understanding of the story and its thematic. It's intuitive enough for the viewer to accept the vagueness of the ghoul anatomy via suspension of disbelief. On the other hand, a more intricate and significant concept, like the Kagune battle system of ghoul in the same respective series, do require exposition of reasonable length, as clarifying it would allow the viewer to understand the foundation of every fight in the series and the mechanic it is based upon In this case, exposition about the subject at hand is not only reasonable here, but it's also a necessity in order to provide an interlocking framework for the story. I want to bring up this final point, even if it's not part of the principle I established. You could argue that at the end of the day, even if the exposition is executed correctly and organically, it does not warrant whether it is interesting or not. With that said, if you're still not engaged by the exposition by then, well then unfortunately, the issue comes from the quality of the story itself. If the story itself is uninteresting, no matter how well the presentation, voice acting, or sound direction is, the audience won't be captivated. Personally, I found Shankyu no Terror exposition to be quite uninteresting despite its good exposition. While I'm perfectly fine with Hunter x Hunter barrage of info dump, even if the discourse around the usage is more divisive. This is just due to how invested I was to the story at the time of watching Hunter x Hunter, in comparison to Shankyu no Terror, which is a story I just couldn't get my undivided attention on. This is not to devalue all the arguments I've made in the video. It's just that even with good execution and substance, the value of the media it holds to the viewer themselves is subjective at its core. But if in a fortunate scenario, the series does have a solid narrative groundwork that the viewer is interested in, poor implementation of exposition can completely sour the experience, ruining the potential of an otherwise excellent material. These are all of the components I can think of a good exposition scene. Now the more important question is, how can we determine good exposition from an already existing show, based on the criteria I established in this video? In the next part of the video, which I will link in the description, I'll try my best to digest good exposition from one of my favorite series of all time, Steins. The following contain major spoilers for the first half of the series and some minor references for the second half. Proceed with caution.